What does it mean to be a successful public transit agency? What are you doing to lead the way? It's time to learn from the top transit professionals from around the world. This is Transit Unplugged with your host, Paul Comfort.
This is Transit Unplugged. I'm your host, Paul Comfort. This week, we continue our tour of Latin America. Last week, we had a leader in Brazil, and now we have Mr. Joubert Flores, who is chairman of ANTPTRILHOS, been in that role since 2010 in Brazil. Basically, it's the National Rail Association that represents all the rail providers throughout Brazil. He has spent 40 years with Metro Rio in leadership roles there. He was president of the Brazilian Association of Asset Management and Maintenance, part of the committee for Brazilian public transportation, author of a book, and a grand official with Transport of Merit. He is currently working with BID, and he's vice president or vice chair of UITP in Latin America. And it is a great pleasure to have him talk about all the things happening in Brazil and Latin America, the role of rail, how rail works, how the bus works, how they're working to integrate new technologies. I think you'll really enjoy this interview with Mr. Joubert Flores in Brazil. Today, we continue our series heading into Latin America with a wonderful guest, Mr. Joubert Flores, who is chairman of a large group of transportation companies, ANTPTRILHOS, and he's been there for over 10 years in this role and has a fascinating background. Joubert, thank you so much for being our guest today.
Thank you for the invitation.
That's great. So I'm calling you. We're doing this via Zoom. I'm in the Washington, D.C. area. Where are you calling in from?
Nowadays, I'm in São Paulo. Honestly, I live in Rio, but I'm working in a company that is installing one line here in São Paulo. So I'm staying for the week to work in this company. And during the weekend, I came back to my house in Rio.
Very good. How are things going down there when it comes to COVID? Are things loosening up a little bit? Is it getting a little better, or is it still tough?
No, it's still tough. Of course, the vaccination is increasing, but you have a long way until you have established this situation.
Very good. So tell us a little about yourself and what you do.
Okay. I have been working in this sector for the last 47 years. I began when I was 19 as an intern in Metro Rio. Metro Rio at this time was only under the construction, in the design. For me, it was a very good opportunity because I left the technical school. I was in the first year in the college, in the engineering college, and I work in the design, in the manufacturing of the equipments, in the commission. And when the operation began, I changed to the maintenance area. I stayed there for more than 20 years. In the beginning, in the power systems. After this, in the electromechanical. After this, in the engineering that takes care of everything, including trains and signaling. And I stayed 12 years as executive director. It was a big change for me because I began in the human resource and institutional relations. And after this include the legal area, the supply chain, and I came back for 6 years in the engineering. So I left Metro Rio after 45 years. Nowadays, I'm working in a Chinese company called BYD that is installing a monorail system in São Paulo that will connect the city airport to the other metro lines. And still have this institutional work as chairman of the association, the Brazilian Association.
Well, you've had quite a distinguished career.
Thank you.
Yes. So tell us some, I guess, why don't we start first with, and did you mention are you vice chair of UITP down there? Vice president?
Yes, I'm finishing my term as vice chairman to Latin America in the Metro Division. Okay, I run 2 terms. And it was a very nice experience with the network is fantastic, and work with the people from the headquarters in Brussels was a very good experience for me.
And you're also, both of us share, I think, that we're authors of books. Tell us about the book that you helped author.
Yes. Look, during my time in the maintenance, we have a very difficult with have indicators and share indicators, and me and two colleagues, we try to put together all the indicators we need. And this book was published in a collection about maintenance. Nowadays, it improved a lot. When I was in the Metro Rio, for 15 years, we participate in a very interesting benchmarking group running by the Imperial College in the London University, is the Comet Nova group that join nowadays 40 metros in the world with a strong NDA clause to have to exchange information. But nowadays you have indicators in a very good way, including for maintenance.
So you spent 40 years with Metro Rio. Tell us
Yes.
about the transportation system in Rio.
Rio is a city with around 7 million inhabitants, in the metropolitan regions close to 12 million inhabitants. We have three systems of rails to make the backbones of the mobility. In the past, we had 300 kilometers of trams, but it was completely terminated. Nowadays, we have only 30 kilometers of trams, are modern, but just is 30. But you have a metro line that exists since 1979 with just 54 kilometers, and a commuter train with 250 kilometers. But unfortunately, you mentioned your experience in the United States. You know that United States, you have in New York, MTA, in WMATA, in Washington. They are good and big public transit authority. And unfortunately, this culture we don't have in Brazil until now. It's one of the goals of our association. Why? Because you have in Rio, you are asking about Rio, we have 80,000 buses in the city. And sometimes the lines are not organized or connected in a good way. So we have a very good loss in the scale. And of course, it represents a cost that you can avoid.
Yes. Yeah. So you mentioned your association. Tell us about this association that you've been chairman of for the last 11 years and what you all do.
Brazil has a confederation of all kind of associations of transport, including buses, trucks, boats, everything, planes. It's in the federal capital, and the freight rail companies they have since this time an association, but the freight companies are all private, and in our sector it's mixed. 10 years ago, 11 years ago, we tried to join this association, but it was impossible because the goal of them is just freight. You have to develop a second one linked for the same confederation. And what is the goal, Paul? The problem is Brazil is a very big country, as you know. You have 8.5 million square meters, but the level of urbanization is very heavy. You have nowadays 210 million inhabitants. 70 years ago, our population was 30% of this, 70 million people. Okay, but at this time, the cities joined only 20% of the population, so around 14, 15 million people. In these last 6, 7, 80 years, the population tripled, but the level of urbanization implement more than 10 times. Now we have 85% of the population living in cities, so around 170 million people, and you have 27 metropolitan regions with more than 1 million inhabitants, and it's 17 cities, just city with more than 1 million inhabitants. But on the other hand, we can see that we have to establish organized mobility with a mass transit capacity. We have only 1,165 kilometers. That is a shame if you compare with other cities. We have metros, we have suburban trains since the 30s, electrified, but we have metro since the 70s. But it's not enough to this kind of population. And it costs a lot with the externalities you have to pay. So the goal for this association is expand our lines to demonstrate to the decision makers that it's important to invest in this kind of systems. So we began this work, and fortunately, we are nowadays can be listened for these people in the Congress, in the executive. So we are increasing this conversation, but it's a long way to have a success.
That's good. So in this association, it's an association of all these transportation providers, and you're working together to kind of work with the government to make things actually more efficient, aren't you?
Sure. The association, the main participants are the operators. Right. All the rail passenger operators in Brazil are in the association. So for this, you have every 3 months a meeting with all the CEOs of these companies to try to have a plan to discuss the strategy you have to follow. So it's very important to put it together. We have also some associates as the big industry, but they are they have no power in the decision in the association, only the operators.
We have with us on the line our good friend and my colleague, Juan Goritti. And Juan had a question he wanted to ask you, if that's okay.
Okay.
Go ahead, Juan.
Okay, thank you, Paul. No, I have one question, very interesting question to Joubert. Joubert, according to your great experience in rail transportation, what is your opinion or your expectation in this innovation side from technology, specifically in the rails area in the future?
Look, I believe that one thing that represents our sector is innovation, is technology. You see that even we don't have so many lines in Brazil, we have already one big line driverless. We use the update technology, and you are also in the ticketing area using the most modern technology. So I believe that nowadays you're talking about autonomous cars and things like that, but you can't forget that this autonomous mode of conduction, it began with the trains. That's right. And in the end of the day, this technology is not more than the route that you have in the train systems, adding with machine learning to try to see everything you can happen. So we are, as the Formula One for the cars, as the lab to develop technology, I believe our sector is the same.
Let's talk about the future a little bit. A big conversation that I'm having with people around the world lately. Just last night, I was talking to the head of transportation in Melbourne, Australia, for a future podcast. And a lot of folks are talking about the need for integrated transportation. So the idea being that you've got the rail, you've got the buses, you've got taxi cabs, you've got Uber and Lyft, and all these modes of public and private operators. Tell us about any efforts in Brazil to move toward integrated transportation, where you're pulling these modes together. The mobility as a service type of things.
Mobility without an integration, it's a lie. You can have this. In the past, since they are private, and you didn't have a strong regulation, you have a lot of competition when it's better to have integration. We are trying to convince that if you can have one decision maker together in a public transit association authority, that can begin with a consortium with these municipalities to have an integrated transportation that will save money and time for the people. Imagine that here in Brazil, the majority of blue-collar workers, they need 2 hours to come from the area where they live to the downtown area to work. So 4 hours in a public transportation is not good for their health, for the quality of life, including for the productivity. So you can improve this. That will improve our GDP if you have a better situation like this. In the past, the buses companies are all quite they understand as enemy as the rail system, and nowadays they understood that it's better to have a mobility that work together, because they can run less distance and it's more profitable, including for these operators. But you mentioned an important thing nowadays with the apps, with all this technology. It's important, but it's almost important to the mass transit and the buses companies understand that the first and last mile and connecting, we need to have together this and to serve better the population.
Where do you see public transportation and mass transportation going in Brazil? You mentioned that you all are lobbying, your organization is, and you're working to bring in new technology. But take us out 5 years from now. Where do you see things happening in Brazil for transportation, public transportation?
The government in Brazil, Paul, they understood that they need to improve this infrastructure, but you have a lack of fiscal capacity to do the investment that we need. Okay, so they are doing these concessions and PPPs to try to attract private capital to this kind of business. I know that is not useful, but you have a lot of cases of success to implement PPPs in metro lines. We have a big one here in São Paulo, we have another one in Salvador, and you have a new one in São Paulo to run a complete new line, line 6. So, but in 5 years, if you have this implement in our networks, we need to reinforce our regulation rules because the contracts need to be respected, and the private company need to have a comfort that this contract will be done with the state, not with the government that changes every 4 years. And you have also to implement the characteristics of the guarantees rules, because in the end of the day, we are doing a public service on behalf of the state, but this is an obligation of the state, not of the concessionary. This is very important in a situation that you are living now, because the pandemic affect a lot all the public transport service in Brazil. In the beginning of the pandemic, we lost around 80% of the demand, and now even we have already recovered part of the economy sector, we still, not only rails, including buses, we are only running 55% of our ridership comparing to before the pandemic. So it's a very big deficit. Only rail accumulate a loss of $2 billion during this period.
Wow, that's something. When all these contractors are running, the bus service and the rail service, do they take the revenue risk? Do they keep the fares, and that counts against them, or does that go to the government?
Yeah, this is a second learning curve you need to take from now. But the government is learning in the world situation. A lot of lines in Brazil, including the buses line, including in small cities, the mayors ever understood that the fare can cover 100% of the cost of the service.
Right.
And that's not correct, because in the end of the day, the poor people subsidize poor people using this kind of understanding. And now with the pandemic, they are beginning to understand that we are trying to talk with them to have a policy. When you have gratuity, the paying passenger pay for the gratuity. If the government has a law of the gratuity, the taxpayer need to pay, not only the users. And a second point, Paul, that is important I know that United States people use a lot of cars, but in big cities they already understood that's not so a good idea. And in Brazil, we have amazing traffic chains because they have a lot of cars in the streets. But the politicians now are understand that when people use their own car, it's not for free, because you have the cost of the street, of the signals, of the people that you control the traffic, and every taxpayer pay for this. So, in the other hand, support that one that has no private car should be, I think that all taxpayers need to help and support. And it's important also to talk to them that if they allowed that the public transportation sector bankrupt, we will never recover the economy, because we will depend then in the future. So these are our arguments now to convince, and fortunately they are understanding.
Thank you so much, Joubert Flores, for being our guest today on Transit Unplugged. I think you painted a wonderful picture of the current status of things and where it's going. And you're certainly the one to tell us, after 40 years working at Metro Rio and now as chairman of the National Rail Association, ANTPTRILHOS, for the last 10 years. Plus, there's a lot of other things we didn't talk about. Your role as a grand official of Transport Merit, and your role in the Brazilian Association of Asset Management as chairman, and the former part of the committee of the Brazilian Public Transportation Association. You are the man in Brazil, it looks like, who is helping to guide what public transportation is going to look like. So thank you so much for being our guest.
Nice of you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Paul. Very nice of you. It was my pleasure.
Hey, thanks for being with us today on Transit Unplugged. As we wrap up our July series on Latin America, we had some amazing guests talking about what's happening right now in public transit in Latin America. We had Dimas Barrera, who's been in transit for a long time, and he is head of a union of bus companies called Sandio Bus, and he's been there for 10 years. It's 17 companies operating around 1,800 buses all around Fortaleza and that area. He also helps oversee a national association which is involved in public transportation. And then Joubert Flores, who is chairman of the group ANTPTRILHOS, which is a similar group, which is responsible for transportation. And he's been president of the Brazilian Association of Asset Management and Maintenance, and part of the Brazilian Public Transport Association, written a book, both real leaders in Brazil and Latin America. And I really want to thank my cohort and compadre, Juan Goritti, who helped me set up these interviews. Juan, thank you so much for helping me set those up and getting these leaders on our podcast. The first time we've ever been able to get into Latin America with some top leaders. And then we also have on the line Paola Realpozo, who is vice president of marketing for Trapeze, and also from Mexico. Paola, thank you so much for being with us today. And so today we're going to do a little roundtable discussion about what we heard from these Latin American leaders and where we think public transportation trends are going in Latin America for the second half of 2021 and into the future. And Paola, I want to talk to you first. You worked for many years in the rail industry in Mexico, and you actually just recently were one of the big speakers, the headline speakers of the UITP Summit in Latin America, talking about what the future trends are. Tell me about what's happening in Mexico right now with public transportation and where you think things are going.
Thank you, Paul. Yeah, I had the honor of participating with the UITP and other groups, the Mexican Association of Transportation and Mobility, the last couple of years. And it definitely gives me a view, right, Paul, of what's going on. I grew up in Mexico City. I was there for the first almost 30 years of my life. I've seen public transportation transform greatly. Every time I go back to Mexico, there's always a new surprise, right? I just came back last night from Mexico City. It's a lot of opportunity, Paul, but it's getting there, right? What I'm seeing is the normal trend. I mean, definitely different than the US. The system doesn't work like here. Most of the systems are private, right? Run by private operators. Some of them are government funding, like subways, right? Some of the light rail operations. So different business models. You still see a lot of informal economy, Paul. We still have this model of single man operation. You know, you own a vehicle, you own a bus, so you deliver the service. but still a lot of opportunity. But because you own the vehicle and you go out there and finding your, your daily wage, you continue doing that because that's what you know and that's what you have to do to bring money back to your household, right? However, what I'm seeing, and I'm really happy to see this, right? Associations, government, suppliers, new business models trying to come up to really bring the enterprise model to these areas, right? And I really believe that it's a win-win situation. It's unknown for many, so there you see a little bit of a challenge, a barrier, right, from these single main operators. But if you think about it, right, it's such a benefit for the city. You get better service, you get more organized service. Technology is actually used to find the best ways to deliver and schedule these routes. The enterprise benefits from having the ability to have almost like economies of scale to be able to use technology to benefit both the community, the operators, the whole operation of public transportation. But most importantly, right, for the operators, right now they know how much money they make every day, how much money they make every month. They know how much money they spend in their operating costs. But if 1 month they have an accident, if 1 month they have their vehicle breaks down, that just breaks their entire ability to really forecast their income. So if they really organize in an enterprise model, that hassle goes away. That preventive maintenance is taken care of. That even the proactive maintenance is taken care of. They have more certainty and less vulnerability on schedule and income. They are more free, if you will, right, to go about their lives, and they can manage better. So again, this is just one example, Paul, of the things that I'm seeing. Collaboration with associations. I see these associations, UITP, AMTM, others really stepping up, talking to us, suppliers, talking to the cities, finding funding, and really making these projects happen, right? We saw the example with Dimas Barreira from Fortaleza in Brazil. He brought together 17 operators, and the results, amazing technology, amazing benefits for the city, for the operators, for everyone, right? So right. I hope that I can see more of that, Paul.
That's good. That's a really good example and a good segue to Juan. Juan, when we talked to Dimas and Joubert, they talked to us about the model. Although there are these associations, oftentimes they have to rely solely on the fare box to fund it. And they noted that they're looking for more funding from the government and maybe a new model for transportation there in Brazil, which is where you're at today. Is there any movement to review that model in Brazil?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for your question. This discussion started some years before the pandemic, because the current model already showed signs and controlled losses for operating companies. And now with the pandemic, this has become more evident, right? It was clear that it need to be discussed again, right? I know that there is now a proposal for a new regulatory framework, which consider many aspects, okay, which is being analyzed in the government right now. It became clear to operators, manufacturers, public authorities, and the technical community that this model of public transport management is exhausted, Paul. And this is unsustainable in the current basis of hiring and costing only, right? It is expansion for an improvement, for example, right? The main aspects that drive this proposal is no longer being held hostage to the fare valve about ticketing specifically, right? So the future is to get a discussion to define a new transport model which considers operating costs more and probably reevaluate the use of subsidies by the government. Who knows? Okay. Yes. It will be a good discussion. We'll see the next chapter, Paul.
What can we expect, Juan, for the next chapter, the post-pandemic urban transport in Brazil? What do you see coming next?
Okay, much is said about active transport, mobility on demand, application, innovation, but none of these contribute to solving the problem of mobility in our metropolis. In public transport of high capacity, the high capacity were not considered in this context, right? This system is the essence of mobility. It is a need that most of the daily commuting happens, and it's based on it that all other applications connect, forming a true network, right, at the service for the population of citizens. currently, the public transport, I think, experienced the greatest crisis in the history right here in Brazil. Abrupt drops in the number of passengers since the beginning of the pandemic, coupled with the need to maintain the service offered and increase the expenses because they needed to the new health protocols, right, has caused a large numbers of companies to be unable to maintain the provision of this service. Right. Over these 15 months, the beginning of the pandemic has lost more than 25 billion reais, around to $5 billion from losers, right? An impressive figure that is being impossible to be supported by the company. The crisis was very, very, very big. But I think not everything is sadness from in my point of view. We see, on the other hand, that the companies have learned a lot to be thrown in the crisis, have learned to adapt their process to the new needs, have learned to be supportive, have learned to understand that the center of everything is the client. This is, I think, the more important for that. With all this, I realized they are now open to receive new process, new technologies to stay alive first and to be competitive in the future, right? If we added here new laws that can be approved to keep this model running, I think we will have a promising future here in Brazil.
Very good. That's good. Well, it's good to be optimistic. And thank you, Juan. And Paola, Juan mentioned that he sees the role for new technologies coming into Latin America. What do you see there?
Yeah, Paul, it's surprising to see that so many operators are actually very advanced. But again, as I said earlier, there's a lot of opportunity. I think, Paul, there's a lot of talk, especially coming out of the pandemic, right? Going back to the new normal, there's a lot of talk about those most common technologies that you could assume there exist down there, right? Like demand management right now. How do you match demand with supply? Very critical. Inclusion, how do you make sure you serve some of the unserved communities? So fleet management, right? Those are the most common technologies that I can see now being talked about. But I can also see that there's a big need to manage your assets, manage your workforce internally, right? So if you think about it, right, like the three pillars almost: mobility solutions, some of the ones that I have already talked about, and then you have your employees, your staff, your workforce management, and then you have your asset management, physical assets, right? Also critical to maintain a safe operation, especially now that we have to cater to the big challenges, right? For example, the environment, right? We need to manage that fuel consumption that is going to serve both the environment goal and the saving cost goals. But we're also seeing more electric vehicles starting to become a thing, at least in countries like Mexico. So our systems ready to manage that, right? Our systems ready to program routes that have to do with different dynamics now with electric vehicles, right? So what I'm seeing, Paul, is a need for operators to really see not only the mobility solutions. Yeah, we need to give users more accurate information, more information about the ride, their journeys, right? That's going to make them come back to public transportation. We need to educate the user. So yes, definitely for sure. But I see a lot of opportunity on the back end almost, right? Where how do you manage that workforce? How do you manage those vehicles? How do you improve the operation in a preventive way? There's a lot of opportunity there. I see interest. People are struggling to really look deeper into cost savings. That's the way to go. And that's something that they have not necessarily seen, right, as an opportunity. But I believe there is, especially now. They're struggling to find new ways for revenue and cost savings.
Excellent. Thank you, Paul, and thank you, Juan, for helping us wrap up this July series on Latin America. And we are looking to have more guests from Mexico and around Latin America on the Transit Unplugged podcast in the months to come. Thanks for being with us and listening to the world's #1 transit executive podcast, Transit Unplugged.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Transit Unplugged in Depth with our guest, Mr. Joubert Flores from Brazil. And I'd like to thank our roundtable guests, Juan Goritti and Paola Realpozo, for their insights in what's going on in Latin America as a whole in public transit and what the future holds for this large and diverse part of the world. And next week on Transit Unplugged News and Views, we have the first in a new series of segments called Transit Tech, where I talk to leaders in the technology side of the transit industry to understand what's coming in the future and how innovation is helping the transit industry as a whole. My first guest is Dr. Farohk Mansouri, the head of data science at Trapeze. We'll be talking about what machine learning and artificial intelligence has in store for the transit industry. If you like what you hear here on Transit Unplugged, take a moment and rate and review it wherever you listen to podcasts. When you rate and review the podcast, it helps other people find Transit Unplugged so they can learn about what's going on in public transit around the world for themselves. So until next week, hope everyone rides safe and rides happy.